Hey everyone, in this video I will be discussing Carl Jung's idea of the archetypes of the collective unconscious. This might sound a bit complicated at first, but hopefully it makes a bit more sense at the end of this video. So Jung has written extensively about this idea, and for this present discussion I've mostly used this book of Jung, The Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. So before we begin, I think it's important to define what the archetypes actually are. Carl Jung has developed this idea throughout his life, and this development began with Jung's analysis of his own unconscious personality, which he documented in the Black Books and the Red Book. And as Jung himself indicated, all of his most important ideas actually originated in what he documented in these books. He wrote, for example, "All my works, all my creative activity has come from those initial fantasies and dreams which began in 1912. So fundamentally, while actively evoking fantasies and dreams, Jung discovered that his unconscious was filled with certain figures. And since Carl Jung had a deep knowledge of ancient myths, cultures and symbols, he discovered that there existed several similarities between the contents of his own fantasies and also the contents of the fantasies which were present in myths and symbols of our ancient ancestors. And as a result, Jung arrived at the conclusion that certain parts of our unconscious are collective, meaning that they already exist when an individual is born, and that they also have a strong commonalities with the unconscious of other individuals in the past, present, and most likely also in the future. At the same time, although they might be represented in different ways, they are also similar across cultures and religions. Jung wrote, for example, "In contrast to the personal psyche, it, the collective unconscious in this case, has contents and modes of behavior that are more or less the same everywhere and in all individuals. It is, in other words, identical in all men and thus constitutes a common psychic substrate of a superpersonal nature which is present in every one of us." These commonalities existing within the unconscious of everyone are what Jung defined as the archetypes of the collective unconscious. He wrote, "Psychic existence can be recognized only by the presence of contents that are capable of consciousness. The contents of the collective unconscious are known as archetypes." So Jung observed that the archetypes of the collective unconscious can manifest themselves in distinct forms. On the one hand, there exist archetypes which have in a way been more developed and have in this sense become a part of the conscious characteristics of a culture. They are, for instance, expressed in myths, fairy tales and traditions. Jung wrote, for example, "Primitive tribal lyre is concerned with archetypes that have been modified in a special way. They are no longer contents of the unconscious, but have already been changed into conscious formula thought according to tradition." On the other hand, there exist archetypes which have a more personal nature and are more influenced by the nature of an individual's private personality. They have not really been modified by a culture. Jung wrote, "Their immediate manifestation, as we encounter it in dreams and visions, is much more individual, less understandable, and more naive than in myths, for example. The archetype is essentially an unconscious content that is altered by becoming conscious and by being perceived, and it takes its color from the individual consciousness in which it happens to appear." As Jung observed as well, the archetypes present within cultures, fairy tales, myths, etc. Are easier to define than the archetypes present within an individual's dreams and fantasies. Jung wrote, "What the word archetype means in the nominal sense is clear enough then, from its relations with myth, esoteric teaching, and fairy tale. But if we try to establish what an archetype is psychologically, the matter becomes more complicated." I believe that this difference can be illustrated by the figure which you can now see on your screen as well. On the left side we have the personal archetypes, which differ for each individual, and although the dreams and fantasies represented by these kinds of archetypes may have their origin within the collective unconscious, the personality of an individual influences the representation of these archetypes. In the middle we have the more modified cultural archetypes. I believe that it is possible to argue that these archetypes originated from many individuals of a community having similar personal archetypes, and these similar personal archetypes may result in the development of myths and symbols, for instance. And as a result, they are no longer part of the unconscious world, but have been made conscious in a way. And in the case this development continues, it is possible that these modified cultural archetypes develop into dogmatic archetypes, such as a religion. And in this case, the archetypes have become more conscious, and they have become conscious to such a degree even that it is not often observed that these archetypes developed from the personal unconscious in the first place. And Jung observed this as well in relation to the Catholic religion. He wrote, for example, "Dogma takes the place of the collective unconscious by formulating its contents on a grand scale. The Catholic way of life is completely unaware of psychological problems in this sense. Almost the entire life of the collective unconscious has been channeled into the dogmatic archetypal ideas and flows along like a well-controlled stream in the symbolism of creed and ritual." So as you can see in this figure, these personal archetypes, they can develop into modified cultural archetypes, which in the end might develop into dogmatic archetypes. However, as you can see, this arrow above represents that it is possible for these dogmatic archetypes to once again return to personal archetypes. And this is the case because, as Jung observed as well, in case the archetypes have become too conscious, they might end up losing their meaning altogether. As Jung indicated, archetypal symbols are extremely meaningful to such an extent that no one even considers questioning their meaning, such as Easter eggs, the tooth fairy, those kind of things. Jung wrote, "The fact is that archetypal images are so packed with meaning in themselves that people never think of asking what they really do mean." However, as soon as man starts to question the meaning of archetypes, it is possible that, in the sense, the archetypes, they fade away, according to Jung. Jung wrote, "That the gods die from time to time is due to man's sudden discovery that they do not mean anything, that they are made by human hands, useless idols of wood and stone." According to Jung, if this happens, reason is the culprit. Jung wrote, "He has merely discovered that up till then he has never thought about his images at all, and when he starts thinking about them, he does so with the help of what he calls reason, which in point of fact is nothing more than the sum total of all his prejudices and myopic views." Jung uses the Protestant Revolution as an example. All the images and icons were destroyed because of their uselessness from a perspective based on reason. As a result, we return to the circle on the left, where the archetypes, especially in the West, are once again mostly personal and unconscious. Jung indicated, however, that individuals often still seek meaningful images and symbols, which might explain why suddenly in our Western culture we are more interested in Eastern religion, for example. Jung wrote, "The Protestant is cast out into a state of defenselessness that might well make the natural man shudder. His enlightened consciousness, of course, refuses to take cognizance of this fact and is quietly looking elsewhere for what has been lost in Europe. We seek the effective images, the thought forms that satisfy the restlessness of heart and mind, and we find the treasures of the East." So now that we have discussed what an archetype is, how they evolve and how they can eventually become meaningless through reason, it is interesting to discuss an example of an archetype as well. So for this purpose, I've selected one of the most interesting archetypes in my opinion, which is the hero archetype. In order to illustrate the archetype of the hero, I believe it is extremely useful to turn to the works of Joseph Campbell. Fundamentally, Joseph Campbell has successfully built on Carl Jung's idea of the archetype, most notably through his analysis of the hero archetype. Similar to Jung, Campbell noticed that throughout every hero myth, the hero follows a similar pattern of departure, initiation, and return. Joseph Campbell wrote, "A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from his mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow men." In this way, the journey of the hero is not just a personal journey, but a universal one. Every individual can relate to the journey of the hero and thus usually not question the existence of heroes. At the same time, the journey of the archetypal hero is, as indicated by Joseph Campbell, similar across cultures. Heroes in movies, for example, go through similar journeys as heroes in ancient fairy tales. For example, as you can see right now, the hero from The Lord of the Rings also has a similar path from departure, initiation, and return. So thank you very much for watching this video. Please let me know in the comments whether you yourself believe in the existence of archetypes and whether you also have some examples of these archetypes.